All right, welcome everybody. Here we are at the current episode of Freedom Hub Working Group. Definitely want to invite you to subscribe to future ones. Here's our enrollment channel right here. This you'll see our yourfreedomhub.com/FHWG for Freedom Hub Working Group. We also record and post all these videos. We're on a variety of outlets, BitChute, Brighteon, and YouTube. And we're also sponsored by Your Freedom Hub. To show you what those look like, this is the Brighteon channel. You'll see there's a host of videos there. Here's a snapshot of what's up on the BitChute site. A lot of the same videos, but different channels people like to watch them. And again, we're sponsored by Your Freedom Hub, which we've got all the disruptive technologies here for consumers. And you'll see there's going to be some upgrades on here as time goes by. So you'll certainly want to come back and take advantage of that. Now, for today's guest, we really have something very, very interesting and very, very timely. So, Charles, if you'd like to do a favor for me and give us a nice introduction here would be great.
Well, sure, Jeff and Steve. It's really great to have this opportunity to hear from you on our weekly Freedom Hub webinar. I met Steve back in the 2000s when I was a lobbyist seeking out small nonprofit clients. And since I was attracting more maverick clients, I said, why stop anywhere? Just keep going and look for some of the best issues that people just don't want to talk about. I had natural health clients. I had animal rights protesters being labeled as terrorists. There were a lot of groups that were being aggrieved by Big Brother and so much crony corruption. And when it comes to Steve, when we met at a restaurant in Bethesda, I believe, around 2007, his regarded, government's refusal to disclose what it knew about unidentified flying objects. And, whether they exist or not, or whether it's a bunch of secret weaponry, there is an argument about how much needs to be secret, how much they're withholding unnecessarily, and what is going on. There just seems to be a need for more information than we're getting. Because we do have these existential questions. Are we alone? And if not, what are these things out in space? So it's a really cool issue that everyone is interested in. Trump has his new Space Force. The media has more respectfully covered UFO stories, especially from those cited by military figures. And since 1996, Steve has run the Paradigm Research Group and is the only registered lobbyist on disclosure in our Congress. He's been in the trenches for years, often alone, and it hasn't been easy. He's put on some great events, most famously in around 2013, Steve may correct my year, he hosted with a few ex-members of Congress a citizens hearing with a lot of these military witnesses to UFOs and other unexplained phenomena. And it was recorded and passed out in DVD form to all the members of Congress to get them to take seriously this issue that we do care about. So that is our introduction, and I'm looking forward to this, Jeff.
Me, myself as well. All right, Stephen, I'm going to now start to give you the permission to share.
Okay. For this seminar, by the way, this may go a little bit over, folks, but
that's okay. But you'll want to click that share your screen now.
It's time to get the share the screen, okay, and bring up my PowerPoint now.
Correct.
Correct. There it is. I'm sharing now. Yeah, because I'm going to slam through something here that normally takes hours. We're going to slam through it in 35 minutes, maybe less. We'll see. But first of all, the topic of this put forward, the question was kind of a question, is the Space Force that has been announced and actually sort of incipient, indicating the end of disclosure. Well, that's an easy one. The answer is no, it's not. The Space Force, and I've been in Washington and paying attention for a very long time, is just one of many, many shiny objects that was put forward in order to show gravitas, show doing something. The military didn't want it, I assure you. They have a classified space program and have for a long time, and it's not a secret. What they do is a secret. And a space force, a public posture, no. Also, saber rattling with respect to potential conflict in space, not a good idea. You're just inviting problems, meaning, you know, you lay down a gauntlet, somebody may just cross it. Next thing you know, you've got satellites being taken out, and things could get very ugly. In fact, the war in space could be catastrophic. War in space meaning primarily going after each other's satellites. Could even mean an EMT event, but that would be basically a nuclear event. We'd have nuclear war, whatever. It's nonsense. Now, you put forward something that's going to bring billions of dollars to the Pentagon, and they're going to say yes, because they don't turn down money easily. And so they went along with it. But even as it is launched, you see how ridiculous it is. They come up with this logo that looks way too much like the logo from Star Trek. The soldiers there that are representing the Space Force turn up in camo fatigues. It's not helpful. But let me go further. The things that have been happening the last few years, extraordinary things, witnesses coming forward, new witnesses coming forward, approaches to Congress and so forth, has absolutely nothing to do with, quote, the announcement of and even the creation on paper of a Space Force. So let's dispel that. Now, what I am going to do now, at warp speed, maybe even ludicrous speed, is show you what has led us, the core thread, in a way, the core of a much more faceted process to where we are, which is close to disclosure. I mean, we're right there. The door is in front of us. We can kind of see it, but we're not quite able to walk through it. There's some reasons for that. So let's begin very quickly. I'm going to take you back to the Cold War, and what I am going to do. Okay, the path to disclosure, and it really opens and begins when the Cold War ends, which really ends under the Reagan administration, though formally it doesn't end until 1991. Once the Cold War is over, the potential for disclosure is dramatically increased, because the Cold War was one of the principal barriers to the government ever relenting on ending the truth embargo. Shortly after the Cold War ended, there was kind of an important thing that happened, and I'm going to bring it up because he was a great man. And that is that in June of 1992, John Mack really went public in a way with his work on contact and abduction. And that was important because Mack was an esteemed, highly regarded intellectual Pulitzer Prize winner, Harvard psychiatrist, trained psychiatrist, who had done a lot of, with many programs, servicing humanity. And he then held a conference, a symposium at MIT, on the MIT campus, about alien contact that he had been researching. And I know some of the people who were there, it was a long time ago, but it was a harbinger to what was coming. He took a lot of grief over this. He paid a price. Because the moment you talk UFOs or aliens, you were immediately escorted into the intellectual ghetto that is ufology by the government and by your peers. He's a great man. He died way too soon. I began my work as a volunteer to John Mack's organization in January of 1996, and then went on to Washington to start the Paradigm Research Group. So for me, he is very important person. The disclosure process, though, doesn't begin until March of 1993, and this is when Lawrence Rockefeller, because the Cold War had ended, approached the Clinton administration to get all the files released. This is the initial fax that went out. This is a momentous and historic document. So the Rockefeller Initiative begins in the White House, goes on for 3 years. All the people that are in the White House or extremely close to the Clintons are fully aware of it and in some cases involved, such as Leon Panetta, such as Vice President Al Gore, such as a key advisor, George Stephanopoulos, and of course, President Clinton. And of course, John Podesta, key advisor to the president at that time, eventually his chief of staff, and his wife, Hillary Clinton at that time, who went on, of course, to be a senator and a secretary of state. Thus began the connection between the Clinton political team and the ET issue. Whether they wanted it or not, it came through the door, they had to deal with it, and they tried to deal with it, and they tried to get some information out. This is the only photo we know of the core group that were engaging the government at the behest of Rockefeller. Rockefeller is right here. John Mack was there. He is next to him. You also have some known people. This is Henry Diamond, who sent that fax to the Office of Science, Technology, Policy. Here is a very young and much thinner Stephen Greer. This is Dr. Bruce Maccabee. And this, very notably, is Robert Bigelow. This is, of course, Linda Moulton Howe. This is Professor Leo Sprinkle, Robert Teets, and this is C.B. Scott Jones. This, and there's, I think, 2 people behind the camera, one of which is Bootsy Galbraith, and I think the other is Richard Farley. They're strategizing up at the ranch. They're trying to see what to do. And this is just an indication that this was a serious event funded by Lawrence Rockefeller, one of the last things he did in his life. The Rockefeller Initiative obviously involved a number of principles and secondary principles. It involved research. It involved reports being given. People say, well, how do you know that? Well, oh, by the way, before I go there, something else happened during the Rockefeller Initiative, 93 to 94, that's notable. And I'm going to do refer to a number of these things that are part of the political timeline. But in 1994, 2 books came out. One is John Mack now comes really public about his work with the book Abduction, Human Encounters with Aliens, bestseller. And then Lieutenant Philip Corso, Army intelligence officer who served on the Security Council of the, I think Security Council of President Eisenhower, writes his book The Day After Roswell with William Burns, which makes some extraordinary statements confirming Roswell was in fact an alien or an extraterrestrial crash event. Something else was going on during that period. This is during the Rockefeller Initiative, 94, 95, 96. Stephen Schiff of New Mexico, in service to his constituents, imagine that concept, decides to try to get records from Roswell to see what was going on. Not surprisingly, he's stonewalled, run around in circles, and complains publicly about that. Eventually, they tell him, when he really continues to put pressure on them, that the records he wanted, particularly the phone records from Roswell, they're gone. We were destroyed in a fire, or we lost them, which is, well, amusing. And then, shortly after the end of the Rockefeller Initiative, which shut down in October of 96, Stephen Greer holds a multiple briefing at the Westin Hotel in Washington, D.C. I attended. One briefing was for politicos, and the other was for general public, where he's trying to bring certain witnesses forward and other things. Edgar Mitchell was there. And it was an event. It was an effort to penetrate the Washington establishment a little bit. Greer, of course, had been working on that for years. He was not done. That was 97. And then, interestingly, something else happened in 97. And that is under a lot of pressure because of the Rockefeller Initiative, because President Clinton was trying to get the files, which he was being stonewalled on, ultimately, a couple of things happened. Sheila Widnall, the Secretary of Air Force, a brilliant woman, put together a $22 million report showing that Roswell was just actually a balloon, but not the Rawin balloon that was originally stated, but the secretive balloon called the Mogul balloon. And they had put that out. But there were more problems because people, first of all, challenged that study as a whitewash, which it was, and then also said you didn't talk about the bodies. And so under pressure from that, plus the fact that in just about another 2 weeks, a huge assembly was going to take place in Roswell, New Mexico, because of the 50th anniversary of the Roswell event. Their Air Force brings Colonel John Haynes out to give a press conference, a very big one, at the Pentagon to a bunch of reporters to sort of, how would you say, preempt the effect of the Roswell anniversary and other criticisms. And it was in this infamous press conference when he confirmed, yes, it's a mogul balloon, and it's for the bodies that people said they saw of 3 to 5 foot gray aliens in 1947. They really saw what were crash test dummies dropped by the Air Force to test various things, but they were 6 foot tall. They were wearing Air Force uniforms and they had blonde hair. And that they had mistaken those 6 foot crash test dummies for the gray aliens they claimed to have seen. And then under time compression, they had convoluted the time frame and thought they saw it in 1947 when they really saw it in 1952. The press practically laughed themselves off the chairs. It was a joke. And Maureen Dowd wrote a column right after that saying this was an absolute joke. It's the only thing she's ever written about the subject, though I've tried to get her to get into this. It was an unbelievable embarrassment for the Air Force, the Pentagon, and for Colonel John Haynes, who I'm sure is a perfectly good man, who was told to go out and say what he said. That was June of 1997. The Roswell, of course, anniversary took place. There was a huge crowd there. It was a milestone event politically and public relations-wise. And so the issue moves forward. But then things get interesting because in 2000, 1,000 pages of documents confirming the Rockefeller Initiative and the connection of the Clinton team to the ET issue, which they will forever have, were obtained and provided to me. They included 2 letters which absolutely confirm Hillary Clinton's direct involvement. And all of this was the result of the work of Canadian researcher Grant Cameron, a good friend. He provided me a full copy of the 1,000 pages right away. I then presented them to the Washington Post and the USA Today, who ignored them. But I also put them on my website. Meanwhile, Grant has established a full website, Presidential UFO, where he developed all kinds of narratives related to those documents and the Clinton ET connection. It's still up there, though it's been modified some. Grant's doing other things now. He's moved in a lot of areas. He's really grown as a speaker and as a researcher. But I think that obtaining those 1,000 pages, which locked the connection between the Clintons and the ET issue forever, no matter what their political aspirations, will be his crowning achievement, and it is well deserved. But then, and so I got those documents in 2001, put them up on the website. Then 2001, May 9, is of course when Stephen Greer held a very important National Press Club press conference, where he introduced 17, I think, or 18 witnesses to a huge room of press and foreign press and cameras. I was off to the left there, as well as a DVD of, I think, 2 to 4 hours of other testimony to the press, which was pretty powerful stuff, and could have triggered, in fact, we knew the ABC was looking into this, could have triggered interviews of these witnesses and possibly a major story in 2001 that could have created the media storm that we needed to force the White House to make a move on this. That all disappeared, of course, when 9/11 happened just 4 months later. But nevertheless, all of this is still on file. All of the videos are still there. Nothing in the internet age goes away. Then next year, another development, the Clinton team starts to drop breadcrumbs, connecting itself to the ET issue. Breadcrumbs, not full engagement, because the Clinton team had substantial political aspirations. But I think they also had aspirations with respect to the ET issue and disclosure. And for that reason, they wanted to keep that connection alive. And the first thing they did was to be supportive of the creation of an organization called Coalition for Freedom of Information, which was funded by the Sci-Fi Channel in connection to the launch of this massive 20-hour series by Steven Spielberg called Taken. And so they put the money up to create a real organization that would be based in Washington. I guess Paradigm Research Group would not be considered a real organization. This is a real deal, with a public relations firm that just happened to be John Podesta's brother's operation, as well as a K Street law firm. They made Leslie Kane the research director. And though John Podesta was not formally involved in the project, though I think he helped set it up, he was the one that introduced it at the National Press Club and famously called for the release of all UFO files because it is the right thing to do and it is the law. Then in 2002, he comes back to a second Coalition for Freedom of Information press conference and repeats the request for releasing all the UFO files. Very shortly after that, they publicly announced that he had raised $25 million to launch what is now the largest and most significant progressive think tank in Washington, D.C., called the Center for American Progress. And he's never left the stage since. Then in 2004, Bill Richardson, who was Secretary of Energy to the Clintons and fully knew about the Rockefeller Initiative, provides an interesting foreword to a book about Roswell, the Roswell Diaries, where he says the mystery surrounding this crash has never been adequately explained, not by independent investigators and not by the US government. There are as many theories as there are official explanations, which means that he just called the Air Force bold-faced liars. Then in 2005, another breadcrumb, but in Hong Kong, President Clinton is being interviewed out there, and he starts talking about extraterrestrials. And then in 2007, while running for office, in this case, it was the former, longtime Clinton friend and former Secretary of Energy to Clinton. He is interviewed after the debate in Philadelphia by Chris Matthews, where he basically ultimately says, you know, that the Roswell thing hasn't been explained, which really got Chris Matthews quite excited. And then also in 2007 is when Leslie Kean and James Fox went to great lengths to, again, following kind of in the footsteps of Greer, but they brought in a lot of foreign pilots and generals and so forth, some connected to Cometa, and held another press conference in which they put forward extraordinary evidence that normally would have excited the media to the point where they've demanded congressional hearings. They went further. They made a documentary about this. She wrote a follow-up book on this. Kean and Fox have done extraordinary work in helping to advance this issue. This is the witnesses that they brought forward, including, and this is very notable, former governor of Arizona, Fife Symington. And why was it important that he was there? Because when the Phoenix Lights events occurred, he was under a lot of pressure, and in order to try to lighten the mood, he held a kind of a funny press conference for which he was roundly criticized. As it happened, he had some financial issues and problems that forced him to resign. He was convicted, I think, of some improprieties regarding the banking, and was pardoned by Bill Clinton, which allowed him to go on with his life. Good man, good family, and he went on and did some very interesting things, but he was out of politics. But then he, under questioning or interviews with James Fox, did something extraordinary, something that requires courage. I hope we haven't forgotten what courage is like. He indicated that actually he saw the craft, the vast, huge triangle craft. It flew right over him. He regrets that he made fun of it, but he was trying to avoid panic in Arizona. And he went public with this, and he chaired, or was the, I think the microphone person for this event. Fife Symington will be a hero of mine for that reason. And then a couple of years go by, September 10, Robert Salas, who had been working with Robert Hastings, the leading researcher in the world on UFOs and nukes, because he's working with Hastings because he is a witness to a nuclear tampering event that happened while he was in charge of one of the silos, or the weapon sites at Malmstrom Air Force Base. And he came forward. Not only did he come forward, but he helped bring other witnesses forward. We have recently learned why Robert Salas was the lead witness for Hastings, as far as I know, on the Malmstrom Air Force Base event. There have been many others, but this was the key one that led to the book UFOs and Nukes, an absolute must-read, one of the most important books ever done on the ET subject, is because Robert eventually revealed that he is a contactee. And so, and I think a conscious contactee. And so when that event occurred, he was down in that silo, he was hearing what was going on, and of course he learned the full story. But as a contactee, it meant a lot more to him. And so eventually he becomes the key front witness. He is now running for Congress in California. I urge people to support his effort in the Democratic primary. And so they brought witnesses. These are all people that were witness to nuclear tampering events to Washington, D.C., held a press conference in the National Press Club, which I belong to. I was there. and provided evidence which should have launched 10 congressional hearings. The press made some fun of it and moved on. Then Leslie Kean puts out a book. This is in 2010. And John Podesta, another breadcrumb, provides a forward to it. In 2011, she puts together a documentary, and John Podesta is in it, another breadcrumb. And then in 2013, there is a significant event, and that is the citizen hearing on disclosure, which I produced at the National Press Club. It cost $750,000, and 42 witnesses were brought to Washington to testify over 5 days in the main ballroom of the National Press Club to 6 former members of Congress, 3 men, 3 women, 3 Democrats, 2 Republicans, and an independent. And it was a major event. It was all filmed, the entire thing. It got a decent amount of press, but not enough to light a fire in Washington. But it was preparatory to something even bigger. And so it went from April 29 to May 3. The filming was done. And then, oh, by the way, this is a wonderful photo of this happening. You have the 6 former members of Congress. We have, let's see, Congresswoman Carolyn Kilpatrick, Senator Mike Gravel, the senator who read or put into the record the Pentagon Papers, Congressman Roscoe Bartlett, Congressman, God, forgive me, I'll get back to that. This is, I'm having a blank on some of these people, forgive me. This is Danny Sheehan, who was of counsel. This is Dr. Joe Bookman, who was an advisor and a moderator of this. And this was a significant event. You see some of the witnesses testifying here. This is another view of it. What came from this was the video record, which was a 10 DVD box set, which included 3 hours of testimony on the Rockefeller Initiative and the Clinton ET connection, and as well as the nuclear tampering events and much more. Why was this important? Because even as early as 2013, which I understood, it was clear who was going to be running for president again in the presidency of 2016 election, and that was Senator Hillary Clinton. Absolute certain. It was also clear she was going to be the leading candidate. Fine. So this DVD set was put together for the primary purpose to be delivered to Washington at the beginning of the campaign, the formal campaign, which now is, they run 2 years now, in case you hadn't noticed. In parliamentary countries, they can do a campaign in a month, and it costs a couple of bucks. We start 2 years early, and it cost about $3 billion. Do we get $3 billion worth of better leadership? I'll leave that to the audience to decide about that. But that campaign was going to begin, and so on November the 5th, 535 of these 10 DVD sets of that testimony was shipped to the entire House and Senate. I arrived later that month, hired my public relations person, a super uber pro with 40 years of experience in Washington, knows everybody. And we set out to essentially, before I do that, I want to mention something that's notable. The shipping of this DVD set to Washington, D.C. was originally scheduled for March 31, and it had been announced as such, meaning that anybody that was aware, and I assure you the Clintons were following everything I did, because I had been on their case since 2000, that's what, 13 years. The understanding was it would be shipped. So purely coincidentally, President Clinton scheduled, and I say he scheduled himself to be on Jimmy Kimmel April the 2nd. Theoretically, the DVDs were on their way. They were in the air. And he goes on and he arranges to be asked about the ET issue, and he makes some interesting statements. This was a preemptive move on their part, anticipating they were going to have to be dealing with this issue pretty soon, not sure. A smart move on their part, it's the same thing I would have done. But the DVDs were finally delivered on November the 5th, and thus began PRG's 2016 election political initiative. Now, the goal of this initiative was fairly straightforward. By November of 2014, Hillary Clinton was the absolute leading candidate to be president, way ahead of the polls of everybody. And also, obviously, she was running for the office following 8 years of another Democratic president. And so people are already planning her inauguration and talking about what kinds of curtains she wanted in the White House. This is understood. The political initiative PRG launched out of Washington, D.C., which very few people know the details about, was to connect her campaign absolutely solidly to the ET issue, going all the way back to the Rockefeller Initiative, which would be a really big story under any reasonable criteria. It might be so big it would set a media fire ablaze that would force the issue so publicly that even the current president, Barack Obama, might be forced to take action and disclose before the election itself. That was the plan. Rockefeller Initiative, that information, which, by the way, with the documents, which is all up on the web, all up on the internet, had been provided to media for years. It wasn't that they didn't know about it. But this time we had a hook. And I started getting some interviews in Washington. My public relations person helped set that up, but I also was making plenty of contacts. I'd built up media contacts over the previous 15 years or so. And we started getting stories into papers, such as the Washington Times and others. What happened next is reporters started contacting John Podesta and Hillary Clinton's campaign for comments. They could not comment. To comment and get into dialogue with the media on this would have exploded the issue, and they did not want that. They wanted to keep the connection to the issue until she got into the White House, and then they had some plans when that happened. And so the point, though, the highly political point that I was going to put out in play as well, on top of or concordant with the Rockefeller Initiative connection to and the ET connection to the Clintons, was that Clinton was a case in which, again, the president was stonewalled. I want this information. You can't have it. I want this information. You don't have a need to know. Just exactly as Carter was stonewalled. This is a constitutional breach. It's a violation of the Constitution. The entire military intelligence complex works for one person, one boss, the President of the United States, who has the right to declassify or classify anything he or she wants at any time. And they're basically saying, go pound sand. So this constitutional breach should be of concern to members of Congress and members of the Intelligence Committee and Armed Services Committee. So the idea, again, is connect this story, bring this out, create a media storm, maybe launch hearings, maybe even bring about disclosure. Because until we do that, until we bring the Pentagon and the White House together under whatever force or duress we can create, and they come to an agreement, we're not going to get disclosure. So the media breakthrough is what we were seeking, and we got it. Let me be clear. This was actually a significant event in American history. The fact that I was involved in it, well, yeah, that's cool, but this is not about me. We got 400 articles connecting Clinton to the ET issue. 400 articles in every major newspaper and significant magazines, and that's just the English language coverage, not the foreign language coverage, which I can't really amalgamate because I got to put in a lot of foreign language search terms into Google. And the articles are not really readable, but they can be translated. And these articles obviously put enormous pressure on the campaign. So they're continuing to get calls from reporters. What do you have to say about this, about that? And they can't respond. What to do? So this record, by the way, will never go away. All 400 articles can be found and read on my website, paradigmresearchgroup.org. all 400 of them, that were published between November 2014 and basically to November of 2016. Now, fine. What came of it? How did this go forward? Well, no, by the way, in the process of doing this, I developed a source relationship with 42 journalists, including 2 Pulitzer Prize winners. Now, what do I mean by source relation? It's one thing to send out a press release to a bunch of media or reporters saying, here's something going on. It's another thing to get directly involved with them, to talk to them directly, to communicate, and have them on a private blind copy list, which I had, sending them updates from time to time. That puts you in really what I call a source relationship. And so that is one of the reasons that we're able to get these articles out. And these articles generated through source relationships would then generate other articles that were reporters I never met. And so it went month after month after month. 400 articles in the middle of the most expensive presidential campaign in history, connecting the absolute de facto next president and leading candidate to the extraterrestrial issue in the middle of that campaign. So that was the political initiative. Now, there is a full section on my website under projects, main, in which the election initiative has a huge amount of information there, articles, videos, and descriptions and so forth that point out just exactly what happened during those 2 years. Let's move on. So, how did the Clinton campaign team respond to this extraordinary situation that had never happened before? Nothing even remotely close to it had happened before. There was a couple of comments in her 2008 election, which I was able to get out, and an article, an appearance on Fox News and so forth, connecting her to the ET issue. But it didn't go anywhere because she ultimately gave up the candidacy to Barack Obama, who had no connection to the issue. But what was happening in 2016 campaign was a different matter. So did they respond? They had to. The longer they stonewalled under that pressure, the more the media would understand this is a big deal. And so what they had to do was to defuse the situation by making limited hangouts in which they would make a statement or put something in print or give an interview in a controlled situation where they totally control the interview, what question is going to be asked, and so forth. Obviously, that's not going down to the New York Times and giving an interview to the editorial report, or even being interviewed by Maureen Dowd, who would have spared no expense or effort in getting the facts out on that. Here's what they did. The first response by the Clinton political team was the famous tweet by John Podesta, February 13, where he says, and this is pregnant, finally, my biggest failure of 2014, once again, not securing a hashtag disclosure of the UFO files. Hashtag the truth is still out there. Copy Maureen Dowd of the New York Times. Once again refers to the fact that he tried to get the files out while he was advisor to Clinton in 1993-94, but was stonewalled. Hashtag disclosure is notable because that was the hashtag that was we were putting on over 2 million tweets. We rained down on the entire Congress, well, as many Congresses that had accounts, as well as all media stuff in Washington. 2 million. This was a group of people that worked with me. We asked them to use hashtag disclosure. There it is. As for Maureen Dowd, why did he copy her? Because she wrote that scathing article a couple of days after that 1997 press conference at the Pentagon, where they said that crash test dummies was what you saw in 47. That was his first response. And more importantly, it was the last tweet as he walked out the door of the White House after working for 11 months for Barack Obama as an advisor, and nobody knows why the hell he was ever brought in as an advisor, except I pretty much know, so they could talk about the ET issue without any concerns under presidential privilege. And then Barack Obama goes on Jimmy Kimmel and talks about ETs. Then Clinton gives an interview to an actress, who, well, I'll know in a second, which is, she didn't talk about ETs, except right after the interview, John Podesta puts out another tweet and says, great interview, Lena Dunham, the actress, but Lena asked her about aliens next time. The truth is out there. Copy Hillary Clinton. He wasn't joking. And who does that? He's the campaign chair to Clinton. She gives a basic interview to an actress trying to reach the millennials, and he puts out a tweet saying, but ask her about aliens next time. Then Bill Clinton goes on the Colbert Show and arranges to be asked an ET question. And then, in an aggressive move, at the very end of 2015, Hillary Clinton gives an interview to Damus Geer, who is a reporter for the Conway Daily Sun, which is an absolute must stop on all of the presidential campaigns in New Hampshire. And he knows that she's interested in the issue, and she basically gives him about 90 seconds on the record where she says, we need to maybe get an investigation going on regarding Area 51 and extraterrestrials maybe are already here. We don't know. I mean, this generated a firestorm of media. A lot of media came out of that. That was probably the boldest thing she did. But it goes on. The breadcrumbs continue. Barack Obama goes on Ellen DeGeneres, and the ET issue is brought up, and he responds to it. Then John Podesta gives an interview to I-Team, in which the extraterrestrial issue is discussed. And then Hillary Clinton goes on Jimmy Kimmel, and that's when she brings up the issue of the UAP as the way to talk about these things, and I want to get the files out. And then Podesta gives an interview to Jake Tapper at CNN, in which, again, he talks about the ET issue. She, just before the New York primary, goes on a very well popular radio show and talks about the issue, and the abduction issue comes up, though she avoids it, but she nevertheless addresses the ET issue. And then in June of 2016, Podesta drops the final breadcrumb when he appears at a high-tech conference called the Code Conference, and again he's asked about and talks about ETs. What's the point here? Secretary Hillary Clinton intended to be the disclosure president. She was extremely angry that her husband was stonewalled on this issue. It could have been his legacy, one of the greatest political legacies of all time. He was treated like, you know, you're irrelevant. The Pentagon hated him. He was a pot-smoking, womanizing, draft-dodging nobody from Arkansas. And he defeated their summum bonum of presidents. That's the wrong phrase. He defeated George H.W. Bush, who was their guy. And a good man. So she knew that she was going to be president someday. And she was going to get the legacy that was denied her husband, which is why they had these breadcrumbs constantly putting up. They didn't do it. No other candidate was doing that. They didn't need to do that. It was risky. But they wanted that connection to stay alive, and alive it did. Now, they didn't want it to get any prominence in the election itself. They can blame that on me. I'm sure I'll never get a Christmas card from anybody in the Clinton team. I get it. I understand. I wouldn't be happy if I were them. She was going to disclose. She was going to be the first woman president in history. She was going to then go to the Pentagon and say, it's over, guys. You stonewalled my husband, but not me. Too much has come out since then. I got a better platform. It's a stronger position. We are going to get this fundamental information out, and I'll fire every one of you if you don't do it. But it didn't happen for a number of reasons. First of all, we didn't get a media explosion during the campaign because she was able to get through all of the debates and candidate forums without a single one of these multi-millionaire news hosts, brilliant, highly accomplished, famous, asking a single question of her or anybody else in the entire Democratic candidacy and the Republican candidacy. And I think there was like 150 candidates on the Republican side, a single question about the ET issue, as if all of those 400 articles weren't even happening. Yeah, there's a bunch of articles in the New York Times and the New York Magazine and Washington Post. Or yeah, but let's don't talk about that. There's actually a reason why they don't talk about that. And so she got through. She was able to get through this key area, which is the debates, key debates, without having to say anything about the ET issue. Now, something else was going on at that time. And this is supposed to be in a slightly different place. So I want to skip by this. Okay, I'm going to skip by this. We may come back to this. Okay. All right. Now, what do we know happened? We know that John Podesta was the last person in their team to speak to the issue. We also know that the WikiLeaks emails that were dropped leading into the election from his files confirmed that he was connected to the issue and that things were going on, but it also revealed a lot of other things which are quite uncomfortable for the Clinton team and did not help her candidacy. There were also WikiLeaks files dumped from the DNC that created a lot of stress within the Democratic Party because it revealed how the Democrats were dealing with her chief opponent, Bernie Sanders. And other things happened. The FBI did a song and dance. They came out and made announcements virtually right before the election, and she lost. And so she wasn't going to be the disclosure president. And the efforts of PRG during that initiative, the political initiative, were essentially cut literally short. That was it. Cut off at the knees. Nothing to do. And so we entered a new era with a new president. Secretary Clinton retired to New York and took lots of walks in the woods. I'm sure she was pretty upset. It was one of the greatest, most, really, one of the toughest losses that any president has ever had. I mean, without getting into whether she's a good president, bad president, or anything partisan, I'm just saying, just from on the surface, just from the basic analysis, it was an unbelievably tough presidential loss, maybe worse than the loss of Gore, that Gore lost in 2000. So, game over. Disclosure process has been cut off. Not much is going to happen, except something else was happening that I actually didn't even know about, that was going on simultaneous with the entire campaign. And this guy is the front person for this. What was happening? This is my best assessment. I haven't been proven wrong, but I haven't been proven right. But I put it out there, and I stand to be corrected by the principals, so I'm pretty sure you aren't going to correct me. At least not now, maybe in a couple of years. What I think happened, and this is incredibly significant, I cannot overstate this, is that the Pentagon is pretty much aware of the ET issue, in case you were wondering. They're also pretty much aware of the entire history of the Clintons. And by the Pentagon, I mean the military intelligence complex, which includes the CIA and the FBI. They're fully aware of the connection between the Clintons and the ET issue, going all the way back to the Rockefeller Initiative, and a whole lot more. And so in 2000 and early 2015, as they peered from their windows, here is what they saw. They saw articles starting to appear about the leading candidate and her connection to the ET issue and her husband's connection to the ET issue. And of course, they were aware of all those breadcrumbs that were being dropped by Podesta and her, and well, and her husband. And they said, what is going on here? And then they started to see the responses that the Clinton team was giving to this press coverage. And they figured out what I already knew. She was going to win the White House, and she was going to disclose the ET presence. And that was a huge problem for the Pentagon. Why? Because they knew something I also knew, and I think a lot of you would probably figure out pretty easily, that when a president or the political class announces the extraterrestrial presence is here, in other words, the disclosure event, they're not going to take the blame. They are going to blame the military intelligence complex. They're going to tell everyone that they stonewalled Carter, they stonewalled Clinton, they've had the secrets, they've abused their power, they have kept this truth from the American people, and I, the President of the United States, is going to give you this truth. I am the great truth teller. In other words, she was going to throw the military intelligence complex under the bus. And that'll be true of any country, by and large, so to a lesser degree, whether it's France or UK or whatever. They're going to blame their military and their intelligence people, not the political class. And they don't see themselves as the enemies of the people. They're not paid a lot, and they defend the country pretty well. They work pretty hard, and they don't want to be thrown under the bus. And so what to do? And I believe in early 2015, they started to think on that real hard and try to come up with something that would mitigate their public relations problem should she win the White House. And the idea they came up with is, what if we were to assist a private organization to form that's not working for us, it's not being paid by the government, but happens to be filled by highly respected careerists from the Pentagon, from CIA, from even corporations like Lockheed Martin, other researchers, all having had high clearances and even been involved in intel work. And that organization were to start doing positive things, like release stuff to the media that we provide it, thus generating some pretty substantial stories, but clearly demonstrating that it looks like the Pentagon is kind of on the disclosure side. It's on the side of disclosure, trying to help, trying to be part of the solution, not the problem. Would be something. And they would be able to call on that if, in fact, they're forced to disclose by a new president. It was a smart move. It's exactly what I would have done. I would have certainly advised them if they'd asked me. I said, yeah, that's what you got to do, guys. I mean, you're not the enemy. I understand the dilemma you've been facing since 47, but yeah, you're going to be thrown under the tank. So yeah, do that. Okay, fine. But they had a problem. Who the hell is going to be the front person for this? It can't be some 30-year career intel guy. It's got to be somebody that the public likes or is not connected to the military intelligence community, but is knowledge, whatever, somebody that is going to be much more palatable to be the lead, the front. And as it happened, this is just history. This is just historic synchronicity. As it happened, there was somebody who had been trying to get their attention for a good while because he had an idea, and it turns out his idea was very similar to theirs. And so they came together and they worked together to put that organization together, to put the project together, to eventually be announced. And that man was Tom DeLonge. Musician, successful, a lot of money, very knowledgeable about the issue, been studying it and reading about it incessantly since he left high school. Good guy, stable, is not the typical rock star. And he wanted to help them get their story out, get information out, and show them to be the good guys. And so he ended up being the lead. Some people didn't know much about him, thought this is ridiculous, but when you look deeper, you realize, no, he'd been involved in the issue before, going all the way back to the 90s. He was involved with Greer for a while. And so he had the ability to help get things going because the thing couldn't be launched with government money. They weren't going to spend any penny on this project. It would completely destroy the whole concept. And so what happens is that is put together, and I know it's pretty well along the line by 2016, because in March of 2016 is when Tom DeLonge drops the first hints that something is in the works. He does this on a 4-hour radio show with George Knapp, Coast to Coast AM, March 27th. And he talks about meetings in the Pentagon, he talks about advisory team, he talks about stuff coming out and so forth, but he doesn't get too specific, doesn't name names. He talks about a media company and nonfiction, fiction, and so forth, and documentaries. It's fascinating and hard to believe. But one of the books he talked about came out the next month. It was called the Secret Machines. And I realized this is real. And of course, I was dying to find out more. But that was the first shoe dropped with George Knapp, who, by the way, is intimately involved in this issue at high level, and a lot of the key people, because he's one of the sharpest, most knowledgeable people in the country or in the world on the subject, and very solid. And of course, he continues to have the position as a reporter for a top investigative reporter for KLAS TV in Las Vegas. So he turns up a lot of places, but he was very much involved following this and probably knew a lot more than he could tell the public. So we waited to see what would happen. This is a photo that emerged out of the WikiLeaks dump, right, which wasn't supposed to emerge. in which they have, it shows that they were already meeting with John Podesta before the election. In other words, whatever this project was that DeLong was going to be the head of, they would already approach Podesta about it. These are two of Tom's people. This is Peter Levenda, who helped write one of the books. Now, they didn't approach the Republicans, they approached just the Democrats. Why? Because of the connection between the Clinton team and the extraterrestrial issue. Back up. And there were 95 emails related to the ET issue that were dumped by WikiLeaks, and Tom DeLong was all over them. And so they were outed. Whatever was going to come was kind of outed at that point. There were some people who were not supposed to be publicly identified. That was a problem for this project, whatever the project was. So it kind of threw everything up in the air, but when she loses the election, it cuts it off at the knees. What do you do now? If your plan is to launch an organization that's going to be able to mitigate the public relations problems of a post-disclosure Pentagon, and the candidate that's going to disclose loses, and the other candidate is clueless on this issue, and you've never even approached them, and they never said anything about it. No Republican administration has ever said anything about it. What do you do now? Well, you pull your reins in and you go back into the recesses and you think on it. And they did. It's notable, though, non-trivial, that after she loses the election, nothing much happens, but then the president is inaugurated on January 20. And 2 days before that inauguration is when the CIA chooses to announce that it is releasing to the general public, to the totally open public on the internet, 13 million pages of declassified documents online loaded with ET stuff. Now, you could have seen these before, but you had to go to the archives and get set up and go to a computer and you could, whatever, maybe see them. And now they put them out so everybody could see them worldwide, just 2 days before the new president. Seems to indicate the CIA was trying to do something, right? Show a flag on this issue, maybe. And so 2017 moves forward. Nothing from Tom DeLong. Everybody is completely wrapped up in the new administration and what's happening or what's not happening. It's really quickly turning into a substantial ongoing media storm, category 1 perhaps. And then something profound happens, a harbinger of something else on its way. And that is in May of 2017, 60 Minutes interviews Robert Bigelow. Remember Robert Bigelow? He was part of the Rockefeller Initiative. He was out at the ranch in that photo. Billionaire, made his money in real estate, but has a huge interest in space. So we launched Bigelow Aerospace Systems. And his principal research, unlike the SpaceX and Bezos's, which is involved in developing chemical rockets to go to Mars, which is a little awkward because I'm pretty sure the US government, and maybe other governments, but certainly the US government has had anti-gravitic craft for some time. But it's obviously deeply classified and can't be talked about. He's developing space habitats, flexible space habitats. They can be attached here, there, whatever, amalgamated, could create a hotel around the moon. It's really cool stuff. And he's been doing a project with NASA on that since 2000, I think, or 2001. This is 13 years later. And it's going very well. In fact, they're about to test one of them on the space station for the first time. It's a big deal, and it was a successful test. So this is the opportunity for 60 Minutes to come out and interview him. And they told him in advance what the questions were going to be. No, I'm sorry. They did not tell him what the questions were going to be, but what they do is they provide the areas, the topics that they will get into. The questions would be inappropriate and not good journalism, but he knows the general areas they're going to get into, and he knows because his ET connection is well known. He's going to be asked about it. So he has plenty of time to decide how he will respond to that question when it turns up. And it turns up at the end of the interview, Laura Logan. So this is the only video I'm going to show you, but And some of you have seen it and some of you haven't. All I'm trying to tell you is that this moment is an historic moment, and Bob Bigelow will always be remembered for this, and his role in this is not over, not by a long shot. Let's watch. Hopefully. Because I have this on slide, but then I'm doing a share, and it may, for whatever reason, may not want to carry through. Let me try. Come on. Oh, it'd be a shame if this doesn't work. Wow. Oh well. I'm sorry. Basically, go watch the video. It's easy to find. Bob Bigelow says to Laura Logan, she asked him about the ET issue and says, you're saying that they're already here. He basically tells her there's an extraterrestrial presence engaging us right now. And she queries him about the fact that people might think he's crazy. He said, I don't give a damn. And then she comes back at him again. And she says, you mean you don't have to look for them out there? They're already here. And he says, yeah. Billionaire. 13 years project with NASA, which hasn't been affected at all. On the most watched, or best known, longest running news magazine in history, tells the entire world there's an extraterrestrial presence here. And the government hasn't contradicted him, and NASA hasn't contradicted him, and the media hasn't bothered him. Think about that. Now, what happens next is interesting. That was May, June, July, August, September, October, 5 months. The To the Stars Academy is launched. The project that he had been alluding to, Tom Dong been alluding to, is finally launched. And it's as big as I thought it would be. A huge website is put up listing their team. They do a video to announce what's going on. They announce the project. They introduce some of the people. There are a couple of key people. Number one is Luis Elizondo. He is basically the team spokesperson. Christopher Mellon, who has a tremendous career on the Hill involving intelligence, so forth. He's the political spokesperson. And then it's also notable Steve Justice, who is the associate director of the Skunk Works. And most people know what the Skunk Works means, and they know that the Skunk Works very likely was involved in ET re-engineering and reverse engineering, which is why one of the former directors of the Skunk Works, Ben Rich, said, we already have the technology to take ET home. And it's also notable that these two gentlemen, Norman Kahn and Jim Semivan, are full-fledged career CIA, Intel, top Intel people. And so what happens? Here's what happens. They announce, right? And in the announcement, they refer to an event in 2004 involving the Nimitz aircraft carrier group, which we noted with great interest because there was some knowledge about that in the research community, ET research community. Actually, let me back up because I've got this different. Okay. What happens next is over the next 2 months, they provide information to the New York Times to be vetted. It produces two of the most important stories ever published in the New York Times. These stories were published on December the 16th, 2017, fully vetted, on the front page by the same authors. Go through the files and find how many times that's happened in the history of the New York Times. And what do these articles provided by them reveal to the world's people? First of all, they talk about the Nimitz aircraft carrier group event of 2004, which is significant. Secondly, they announced that there was a UFO study investigation project that went on in the Pentagon from 2007 to 2012. This is notable because Luis Elizondo, one of the team members, ran it for a while. Is it profound? Not profound. The United States government, military intelligence complex, has been investigating the ET subject at the deepest levels every minute of every day of every week of every month of every year since '47 without stop. No holidays, no weekends off. So the idea that there was this program is irrelevant, and except that this was not, it's not a program they wanted, But what was also announced is, well, let me back up on that. Anyway, this program was announced. It's called the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. Eventually, started off with another name, doesn't matter. They also announced and provided gun camera footage related to that incident involving the Nimitz aircraft carrier. That was significant because it was the first gun camera footage ever formally released by any government anywhere at any time. And I'm talking about gun camera footage from military planes of a UAP intercept. Never released. They released a small clip from the Nimitz event. How did they release it? The Pentagon declassified it and gave it to Luis Elizondo, and he walked out the door with it along with 2 other clips. Understand, see what I'm saying here? The Pentagon could not give it to the New York Times. They gave it to Luis, who's part of this new private organization, and he gave it to the New York Times. That was major. And the footage was put up on the website of the New York Times, where it's been seen here, there, or somewhere else millions of times all over the world. They announced that Luis Elizondo was the director of that program and now a key member of the team. And they also announced in that article that Harry Reid was the one that got that program. That's the reason the Pentagon did it in the first place. They didn't want it, but when the Senate Majority Leader, who controls some of your funding, comes to you and says, I want it, and I'll provide the money, you do it, whether you like it or not. And they also announced that Robert Bigelow was involved in the ATIP program because his facility was used for labs to study metamaterials. So he's not a member of the To the Stars Academy team, but he's connected to the research that they're announcing and undoubtedly to some of the members of the team, which raises an interesting question. Was there a connection between his going on 60 Minutes and saying there's an ET presence? You betcha. He knew there was going to be this announcement of the To the Stars Academy, but he also knew that none of the team members, including DeLong, was going to be able to say there's an ET presence here or release classified information, and they weren't going to be able to violate their non-disclosure agreements, and they were going to basically not even say the word extraterrestrial. The reason that was because they have a group backing them in the Pentagon. How big, we do not know, who we do not know, but they are giving them the cover. They're covering their back, and if they stray too far from the core approach, they could lose the whole project. And so they have to play it down the middle. But Bigelow does not have that problem. He does not work for the government. He has a contract with NASA. He doesn't have an NDA with them on this. And so Bigelow goes on national television and tells the world there's an ET presence because the To the Stars Academy team cannot. But anybody with half a brain could figure it out. Oh yeah, of course every member of the To the Stars Academy knows there's an ET presence. And one day they're going to tell us. You start to see how significant this is and why this is the thread that's leading to disclosure and not the Space Force. They also announced that the pilot that saw the object involved in the Nimitz event, well, there were 80 of them, is willing to come forward, and he gave an interview. The pilot that came after him that actually did the the pilot that was working with him was acknowledged, but she would not be named publicly. She appeared in silhouette. She doesn't want to endanger her career. Eventually, we'll learn that other planes were sent out later, and they're the ones that got the forward-looking infrared radar footage that was, in fact, part of that clip. By the way, the clip of the Nimitz object is only a short clip. There's a much larger clip. So what happens after that? Well, Christopher Mellon then writes an op-ed in the Washington Post, basically challenging the Pentagon to get with it and start doing stuff. So you see that, how interesting that is? You got this private organization now on the outside of people that used to be on the inside, but now that they're on the outside, they're able to write op-eds encouraging the Pentagon to do something, which is kind of helpful, right? And so the To the Stars Academy, at the time it was launched, and certainly as of the time it put out those articles in the New York Times or supplied the information, was leading the disclosure movement, and it still is. But really, and I thought I'd never say this in my lifetime, as of that day, that event, that launch, October 11th, 2017, the military intelligence complex is leading the disclosure movement de facto by surrogate, because they can't do it directly, because that would be a constitutional violation. Lastly, and much has happened in the last year on that. I mean, because of the launch of the To the Stars Academy, because of those articles, other witnesses have come forward. Some of the witnesses that came out are writing books. There's been a show developed on History Channel called Unidentified. It's now in its second season. There are things bubbling up all over the place because they took the lid off the pot. And more importantly, every witness that comes forward and nothing happens to them is telling a lot of people out there who have tons of information about this, all under various restrictions, that if their restriction is no longer in place, or they never had one, that it's okay. I think I can speak up now. Nothing's happening to Kevin Day. Nothing's happening to Luis Elizondo or Commander Fravor. Nothing's happening to Bob Bigelow. And so you see, once you take the lid off the pot and keep the heat on, a whole lot of bubbles are gonna, and steam is gonna be coming out, and it can't be put back. And lastly, we must never forget that behind the To the Stars Academy are a group of insiders. We don't know who they are, but they are providing the space that allows this to go forward. We can be assured that there are other insiders that hate this, that they do not want this to happen. They want the truth embargo to last until the end of time, or certainly until they die. And if they get a chance, they will shut this down. So this is not an absolute certainty. It could go away. But those insiders are critical. How many? We don't know, but it's numbers like 30 and 40 have come up. One day, I'm sure we'll know the full story. It's going to be an incredible story. It's going to make an incredible book. There's going to be movies, docs, you name it. But it's not just the To the Stars Academy. It's the people inside the Pentagon, possibly the CIA, that are providing the necessary cover, that have their back. One day, I hope to know all their names. That's what is leading to the door that we will finally open to disclosure. What's going on in the current administration is by and large completely irrelevant. Though the president was briefed by one or more of the pilots, it didn't really generate too much. He was then interviewed by Tucker Carlson in Japan and about the ET issue, and he basically said, I don't really think it's true, but the pilots were saying something. Is it possible that some secret, really elaborate, complex, strategic thing is going on behind the scenes because this is happening? Maybe, but I'm paying pretty close attention. I mean, I'm nothing to listen to the news 24/7. I don't see it. I don't think it's there. Could that change in the future? Perhaps. Okay, I'll take your questions.
Well, I have to tell you there, Steve, that was pretty unbelievable. And you're right, when the smoke clears, it's going to be a pretty amazing story. I've already bought a bunch of domain names since you've been talking, so just to kind of get ready for those.
Yeah, always the entrepreneur.
Yeah, exactly.
Where do I go back to in the share? Where do I want to go?
Oh, here, I'll take back control of the thing here. Hold on a second. Yeah, I'll take back.
I know how to yield to a higher power.
There you go. Anyway, so, but the thing, it's interesting because, it's hard to keep a lid on anything like you'd said, but yet the lid on this has been really well kept over all these years. And
well kept up until recently. The lid's off. Well,
I appreciate that. I mean, but how much longer is it going to be before, like, the real information finally bursts all the way through? Considering it's burbling, there's like TV stuff, so it's all like frittering around the edges, but they haven't like said, and by the way, here's the actual thing.
Well, look,
when are we going to get to that?
Disclosure itself is a big deal, and it will come from one of two places. One, it'll either be an American president or be another president, and Putin is the most likely candidate. That's one of the things I didn't get into. In fact, let me go back to that. Well, let me. You saw the slide.
That slide you zipped by, yeah.
Here's the thing I left out. After the election goes the way it went, the To the Stars Academy was really kneecapped, and I'm sure there was a lot of sentiment. Let's just drop this. Let's just go back to business as normal, and let's don't launch this. Let's wait 1, 2, 3 years, whatever. But ultimately, they waited 11 months to kind of see what was happening, and then they launched October 2017. One of the reasons they might have launched is, and I can't prove this, but I just have a suspicion, is that after the election, I went to the UK to stay for a good while. I arrived in April. I was very depressed and upset and bummed out, and I just wanted out. So I went to the UK. I had a place to stay. It was very comfortable. It's very nice. I wasn't there a couple of days, maybe a week, when I got a call from, and I'm curious about the timing on this. I got a call from a Russian television network, national television network, like the most popular one in Russia. It's got all the great programs. And they wanted to interview me in London, and they had a team there. I said, look, I'll interview with your station, but I mean your network, but I will only do it in Moscow. And they said, well, pay your way, buy your visa, fine, do it here. So I scrambled, got my visa, and I flew to Moscow. I stayed a week. And I did some planning ahead of time. And I arrived, the very morning I arrived, I took a $1 Moscow subway from the airport, really good subway, by the way, right to where I was going to stay. And that was just a short distance from the studio. By the way, I got an Airbnb 1 week for $86, all right? Anyway, I went and get the interview. And in that interview, which is on my website, there's a key section called China and Russia, in which I discussed the implications of Vladimir Putin being the disclosure president, which I had talked about on American media countless times, hundreds of times, going back to 1998. I bring it up all the time just to go remind the Pentagon relentlessly that there are other presidents in this world. And remind the political, the White House. Well, there's other presidents in this world. So you may have all these reasons why you're just not going to go there, but another president does, and you're going to have a lot of egg on your face. You're going to have your pants down, and that other president is going to get all the glory of the most profound event in human history. So I've done that, but this time I did it on Russian soil. No one had ever done that before that I'm aware of. But I did more than that. I had a colleague in Italy that set up 6 meetings for me in Moscow and then flew up to join me for those meetings. He has a lot of contacts in Russia. And so in the last 3 days before I left, about 2 days after the interview at Ren TV, I met with 6 different groups of Russians. One was a group of Russian contactees. That was interesting. One was with the former chief of staff of Lavrov, the foreign minister. He was not working, but he was just recently left that job. He was the one that gave me, I guess, the most. He was the most interesting one. He was not there to tell me anything but size me up, because who was this guy? And then several other groups of Russians that had been working on the issue while they were in military or in the Russian or Soviet government. Now, not much happened. I've got one translator, and you can't. This is a complex subject. You can't get into much depth, complexity, when you're dealing with a translator she was nice and okay, but she's not a professional translator. Didn't matter. The point was to have the meetings. Hello, how you doing? Do svidaniya. Why? Because if Putin, who Kremlin was tight with that network, and it was that network is a favorite of theirs, didn't know that I had come to Moscow and was giving that interview, he sure as hell would know if I had those meetings with these groups. Now, why was that important? Because I wanted to see what the reaction would be. I wanted to see what would happen, and what would happen next would tell me, give me a sense of what Putin's disposition is, in fact, on this issue. So I come back to London and I wait. And I wait a couple months. And the first thing that happens that is interesting, actually maybe 6 weeks, is I find that a small bit clip from my interview with that network, Ren TV, ended up in one of their shows. And one that I had been following. It's in Russian, but I could sort of know what's on it. And so that was good. They didn't censor that. Okay, fine. What happened next? A full copy of the interview, the whole 2 hours, whatever it was sent to me. I got it. It left Russia and got to me. It wasn't the high-end quality that was used on television, but it was a copy of the interview filmed by second camera. So I got that. I'm going, okay. By the way, the other thing was I was able to leave. I was able to come back to London. I was concerned that when I got to the Moscow airport that they were going to say, Mr. Bassett, we need to talk to you for a few minutes. Just want to discuss something with you. That didn't happen. And then the next thing that happened is that 2 articles appeared in Pravda RU with headlines like UFO activist, I forget the title, wants Putin to disclose or something in the articles. And I'm going, oh, no way. Those 2 articles, or it could be Pravda or Sputnik. I think it was Pravda. Didn't matter. No way those articles make it out if Putin doesn't want it. And so what did I learn? I learned that Putin is perfectly comfortable with being associated with the disclosure issue. And that should have sent chills down the spine of every knowledgeable person within the Pentagon. So this was in May 3, I was there, I think May 3 of 2017. May, June, July, August, September, October, 5 months later, they make the decision to go ahead and launch the To the Stars Academy anyway, even though Clinton did not win the election. And so I'm wondering, and I'd love to have it, I'd love to have it confirmed. It would be kind of cool one day if my travels to Moscow was like a reminder that, like, we can't just continue to sit on this. Because yeah, Clinton didn't win. So we're not worried about having her disclose and throwing us under the bus. But what happens if Putin discloses? You don't think the political class in the United States is not going to throw the military intelligence complex under the bus because they didn't tell us the truth, and now we get it, the world gets it from the leader of Russia? That's a really big public relations problem.
Pretty crazy there, Steve.
So that's the other thing I didn't mention.
Yeah, no, I'm going to slip one last quickie in here. We ran so long today, but as you can see, it is a pretty compelling situation. I see what you meant about staying on this thing for hours on end. Charles, why don't you slip in a last little quickie question, and then we'll kind of zip out of here for the day.
Sure. Steve, any hope that Putin or To the Stars Academy or anything else that possibly could make this a really big issue? Hillary's gone, so we have to look at new opportunities. So what are you holding out hope for something big to come out about in the next 6 months or a year?
For some time, the disclosure process has been held hostage to the political crisis. It's been ongoing. There's been a political crisis in the country from election day on. I can't believe anybody would deny that. Obviously, the impeachment was just one example of how deep this crisis is. And there's just no way that you're going to get hearings on this issue. The To the Stars Academy has been up on the Hill meeting with people behind the scenes for some time. I'm sure that's in preparation for hearings one day, but the Congress is not going to have a hearing on this issue in the middle of this. As far as the political media, which is my forte, and I really, they're not interested. This story, what's going on now politically, dominates and consumes everything. That's been the case, and that's why the To the Stars Academy slowed down. You can get any more articles. They could have generated 10 New York Times articles. They haven't. They did the Unidentified series. They've done some things. They've been up in the Hill, private. This is fine. But they're slow walking this thing, waiting for political resolution and a return to some normalcy. So I think that the number one thing that is preventing this process from catching fire and finishing is the resolution of Donald Trump. I believe that as long as he is president, I do not think it can happen in this country. Putin could do it anytime he wants, of course. Now, I want to be a little more balanced on that. As long as Donald Trump is president now, and in other words, during this term, because of everything that's happened, it's not likely, extremely unlikely. If Trump wins a second term, then essentially that's kind of it. I mean, it's possible the Democrats will impeach him again if he wins a second term, but in many respects, we're over the hump, and whatever's going to happen could be rather chaotic, but still, it's different if he's in the second term. Probably that's it. It's 4 more years and that's it. Now, it may be in that circumstance that some back doors will be open, some discussions will be had, and you could see something emerging out of the second administration of President Trump. But it's hard to look that far ahead. I mean, the way things are now, it's like being in the middle of a hurricane and you're trying to find out what's going on down the road. You can't even see hardly. It's just chaos. And so it's hard for me to go past that. But as far as the rest of this year, I think you're going to continue to see the issue slow walk. You're going to continue to see some witnesses develop. You're going to see some TV stuff. The issue is never going back in the box. But crossing that finish line, the ultimate goal of this 70-year movement, well, 70-year modern movement, and certainly the major disclosure movement that began in 1993 or 92, probably not this year, but unless another foreign head of state does it. So I'm going to be, I've got an office now at the National Press Club, Press Building rather, which is where the National Press Club is held, which I belong to, and I can utilize very nicely. The Press Building is a prestigious building in Washington. It's 2 blocks from the White House, and I will launch. It's been delayed. There's a lot going on, including me getting old and having old things happen. Launch the podcast, the Disclosure Wire podcast, which I hope to use as a platform to bring people to interview that you would normally never see anywhere else talking about this issue.
It's going to be very good, Steve. I have to say, when everyone made that, when that famous quip was made that we live in interesting times, that's a valid statement every single day of the week.
I'm never bored. In the first half of my life, I was bored to death.
But if you look at all of history, there's never a bad or less interesting day than another in terms of what's always afoot. So that was great, and I appreciate spending time with us today. We're going to definitely want to reconvene and find out about some of the latest outbreak, as it were, and we'll certainly have you come back. So again,
look forward to it. I look forward to getting the link on this because I think I want to promote this. I believe this particular narrative, though it has some flaws in it, I goofed up a little bit. I think it's extremely strong, and I'm going to try to promote it heavily. And of course, that will be promoting Freedom Hub working.
Fantastic. Well, appreciate the effort on your part too.